So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So why are we all here in this room? I'm looking at the attendee list. We're now at 83 people in this virtual room, all here to learn more about insurance and how to navigate mental health insurance benefits. So really, every year, millions of families in the United States are impacted by mental health. And really, the problem is exacerbated by the lack of access to quality, affordable, and local mental health services. So here at Embark, as the nation's leading family of behavioral health networks, we really feel that we have a duty and an obligation to do something about this issue. And again, I hope that that's why you're here too, is you want to be out there advocating for your families and your clients. And so I feel really honored to be in this room together today, working to improve the current situation, and that we're all here together to do better. So in our webinar today, we are going to discuss as well as explore and learn some effective ways to navigate this really complicated insurance maze, really to empower you all as our professional community to be more effective advocates for the families that you serve. So I'm quickly going to introduce our amazing panelists. And so when I introduce you, if you want to just say hello, because in that way you will be added to the screen, that would be wonderful. So I'm going to introduce Lori Brown. She is our Vice President of Revenue Cycle Management. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks for being here. And I will next introduce Shelly C., who is our Utilization Review Director. Thanks for being here, Shelly.
Hi.
Good morning. Next, I'm going to introduce Sakina Amin, who is our Vice President of Admissions.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. And it's quite early where Sakina, Shelly, and Lori are. They're out on Pacific and Mountain Time. So thank you for being here so bright and early. Matthew Kane, welcome. He's our Director of Admissions.
Morning, everybody.
And then finally, I'm going to introduce Paul Greenspan, who is our Vice President of Payer Relations.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you, everybody.
Thank you so much. So just to jump right in, as we can see, insurance is a hot button issue, and some of us know a lot about it, some of us may not. And so Sakina, can you kind of start us at a baseline and maybe provide us with a sort of insurance 101, just so that we can understand, what if you don't know anything about insurance benefits, just an overview of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sabrina. So I think one thing to note before we start to get into a little bit more about insurance is just to say that if you don't know anything about your insurance or you're not very familiar with the benefits, that's okay. That's common. And if you are working with Embark for your mental health services, we take a lot of time in our admissions process to make sure that you understand your benefits, how we're going to work with them, and what to expect. So on the next slide, these are three things that I think are important to consider when you're working with your insurance that you would want to know. So eligibility, what services are you eligible for? Deductibles, copays, and coinsurance. So what out-of-pocket costs would you be expected to cover with those services? And then the authorization process. How does a provider actually go about getting that service approved for you? And those are all separate pieces of the contract that you're in with your insurance company that we can walk you through how all those things work. On the next slide, there's three ways that are quick ways that you can get a little bit more information about your insurance benefits. One, most insurance companies have an online portal nowadays. And so you can log on there and get that information of what are your deductibles and copays, what benefits do you have available to you. Another option is to call member services. Typically, there's a number on the back of your card where you can call and ask those questions. And then the other thing, like I said, if you don't know and you're not familiar and you are working with us at Embark, we are more than happy to guide you through that process. The start of our admissions process is verifying your benefits and eligibility in two ways. We first pull up your benefits online to get an idea of what your deductibles and copays are and what services you're eligible for. And then after that, we also do a live verification where we call the insurance company and get more detailed information before we move further in the admissions process.
Sakina, that was wonderful. Thank you for putting that in a tight little bow super quickly. And I know Matt, your amazing colleague, is going to be helping us really kind of dive a little deeper and understand what numbers are important, what terminology really means. Like, I know for myself, coming into this field of mental health, like, what's a deductible, what's coinsurance, and what's out of pocket? Often many of us are coming into this process unexpectedly, right? This is not something we learn in high school or college oftentimes. So Matt, would you be able to share with us just kind of a more understanding and maybe a case example?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so when we're looking at a verification of benefits, and we do verify that two ways, as Sakina mentioned. We look on our online portals with that particular payer, and then we also do a live verification just to make sure that those numbers and those calculations are correct and we're getting the most accurate information. So the four big key ones that we look for is deductible, coinsurance, copay, and out-of-pocket maximum. So what your deductible is and what that means that it's the amount you owe for your healthcare services before your insurance company begins to pay. So they'll set on that particular on your policy, they'll set a particular dollar amount. Once that dollar amount has been met by the insurance carrier, that's when your insurance company will begin to pay at a particular percentage. So that's when they look at coinsurance. Now, this changes from plan to plan to different policies. Some coinsurances don't have a coinsurance. You could be covered at 100% by the insurance company. Some have a 70%, 30%, 40%. It could be different. But what that means is it's the percent of the medical bill that you will pay until your out-of-pocket maximum is met. Then you have co-payments. Co-payments are a fixed amount that you pay for a covered healthcare service that in most instances, same with coinsurance, would accumulate into your out-of-pocket maximum. So what your out-of-pocket maximum is, so it's the most you should have to pay for a healthcare service for that annual year. And in most instances, once your out-of-pocket has been met, you're covered at 100%. Now that's whether you're participating in behavioral healthcare services or you would go to a doctor. In most instances, financially, you would be covered for the remainder of that calendar year or your annual year until your insurance resets. On the next slide, I'll have an example of a breakdown of the verification of benefits. So like we just discussed, for this particular example, there's a $300 deductible per calendar year. So at this time, this member has $77.47 met year to date as of right now. So what that means is they still have the remaining $222.60 remaining year to date. Once that $222 has been met, for this plan, they do have a 20% coinsurance. So the insurance carrier will only cover 80% of billable services. And that means that the policyholder would be responsible for the remaining 20%. So let's kind of look at this on a lower scale. So say our allowable rate is $100 per day, and that's or per service, and that's what we're looking at. So as the policyholder, we'd only be responsible for 20% of that. So if our providers that we're engaging in treatment with is charging $100, as the carrier, I'm only responsible for $20 per service, which would accumulate into my out-of-pocket maximum. For this plan, there is no copays, which is great news. So there's lessens our cost there a little bit. And then our out-of-pocket maximums. So this particular plan has a $1,000 out-of-pocket max per calendar year. Year to date, $77.44 has been met. So that means that the remaining $922.60 would need to be met until your insurance then covers at 100%. And in most instances that happens, but there is some particular plans that are written out a little bit differently. But that's something that we do explain on both of those verifications in detail.
Excellent, Matt. This is really, really helpful and insightful. So moving right along as we continue, Sakina, if I turn the time back over to you, there's the terminology being benefit eligible versus being approved for a service. What is the difference?
I think that's really important and something that gets a lot of people tripped up when they're looking for mental health services. So when we're talking about your deductibles, co-pays, what your insurance covers in early on in the admissions process, or if you were to call your member services and get your benefits, what they're letting you know and what we would be letting you know is what benefits you're eligible for. We don't get authorization until just about before you're going to start a service. So most insurance companies don't allow us to call in authorization until 24 to 72 hours before you start a service. So everything that's happening early on, if it's not right before your service, we're just talking about you have the option to utilize this benefit. It's eligible to you. And then when we get closer to your actual admission date, we take a lot of clinical information from you, and we use that to say, this is why we think this person should admit to this service. And then the insurance company has the opportunity to approve, deny, or ask us for more information.
Wonderful. So I feel like we're in kind of a funnel here. So we have this really broad view of insurance so far. So we have the benefit breakdowns. We talked about, just terminology and the general process. All right. So turning the time over now to Lori, as we dig a little deeper, what really are the components of authorization and how does that all work and come about?
All right, thank you, Sabrina. So what I'll highlight on for you today are the 3 different types of authorizations, which include pre-certification, concurrent reviews, retrospective reviews, and how they all impact the continuum of care. Okay, so pre-certification, the first step in the authorization component starts with a pre-certification, where the provider reaches out to the insurance company to seek an authorization before the services are rendered. The key term to pre-certification is the pre-component of it, right? So you want to make sure that happens beforehand. And once a pre-cert has been obtained from the payer, it'll be good for a defined period of time. Once that period expires, a renewal authorization or a concurrent review will be required. This entails ongoing monitoring of the patient's clinical needs to ensure positive outcomes. And these authorizations are renewed as the previous authorizations expire. There may be multiple concurrent reviews during the course of treatment. So if your original pre-certification was good for 10 days, we'll do a concurrent review on day 11, and maybe they give you another 6 days. And then so after that 6 days expired, we need to do another concurrent review. And the objective is not to have gaps in those reviews, so you continue to have coverage for the course of treatment. Now, one third option is a retrospective review, where it can be obtained if the provider did not get a pre-certification and the claim was submitted prior to receiving an approved authorization. Okay, so this means you can basically appeal if it wasn't authorized or if you did not continue to get authorization. Okay, so no matter which type of authorizations are used, if it's a pre-cert concurrent review combination, or if it's done in a retrospective manner, all of this is dependent on really good documentation from the provider or from the group of providers.
Great. This is, again, extremely beneficial. And I know that in addition to sort of the components of authorization, sometimes insurance companies will ask about medical criteria, or there will be like a denial or some sort of concern when it comes to medical criteria. So Shelley, can you expand on that and help our audience understand more and some of our parents know what that might be because?
Yeah, absolutely. So the dreaded medical necessity criteria, right? So what is that even? So there is medical criteria for every level of care. So you have your RTCs, PHPs, IOPs, and outpatient, which is what we're going to focus on today. So medical necessity criteria is a set of rules set in place by the insurance company. So I notice there's a lot of parents on here. You probably at some point have heard it's not medically necessary, and you're saying, wait a minute, my kid needs care. You know, they've had a suicide attempt, or they've had thoughts of suicide, or all these things have been going on for years. And the truth is the insurance company, while some of that's important, they look at what's happening in the here and now. And so then it really becomes about advocacy, which we'll tap into later. But just to kind of hit at a high level, so RTC requires 24/7 monitoring. It's usually when someone is a danger to themselves or others. So they have suicidal ideation, they have homicidal ideation, or they're aggressive in the home. Those things might lead to an RTC admission. In addition, you don't have to have those two things, but you would have to have multiple deficits across areas of life. So inability to meet your ADLs, which are your activities of daily living, showering, eating, sleeping, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what they look at really. Does this child or client need 24/7 monitoring to stay safe and get treatment? After RTC, or in a lot of cases, clients will step down to PHP, which is partial hospital program. So the insurance companies still see this as a higher level of care because they require 20 to 30 hours of treatment weekly. So it's a short-term step down between RTC and IOP. And what they're going to want to see is still some so they're coming from RTC, going to PHP, but they're still, maybe they're still having suicidal ideation. Maybe there's still some deficits. Maybe they need a lot of structure to help them through school. And so that they'll remain in PHP, and usually insurance only authorizes PHP for a short period of time. And then you would see them go to intensive outpatient. So that's, again, a step down from PHP and is between PHP and outpatient on kind of the continuum, which Embark offers at our programs. So what we see in IOP is that they need 9 hours of treatment. So it can be a little longer term than PHP. And so what they would want to see is they still have some issues that they need assistance with from someone on a daily basis or multiple times a week. And then outpatient is really just any of us probably would qualify for outpatient because, if you have anxiety or sleep issues or any of those things, it's at least 1 hour of treatment a week. And usually they're mild, maybe moderate symptoms, depending on what it is.
Shelley, I love what you just said, and we're getting lots of communication in the chat about what the acronyms mean. So before I know we're going to be switching slides, would you be so kind as to share some of those with us?
Sure. What acronyms? The rest?
So like RTC, PHP.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry about that. So RTC is Residential Treatment Center. And that is going to be not inpatient at a hospital, but a step down from that. So it's still a set 24/7 setting where they're getting lots of therapy and treatment. PHP is partial hospital program, and that's going to be a step down. So it's an outpatient level of care, but higher than your regular just 1 hour a week. Intensive outpatient would be the IOP, and that is 3 hours a day, at least 3 days a week. And then outpatient is your individual or family therapy, group therapy that you might go to, but you're still living at home and doing things in your normal environment.
Thank you so much, Shelley. This was a wonderful breakdown, and I appreciate you clarifying those terms. I know we use them all the time, but yeah, the acronyms are great to now have in your back pocket. All right, back to you, Lori. So we are wondering, and I know that there have already been some questions, like, do you have to use an in-network provider? What is really the deal with that? Are you stuck to what your insurance plan offers? Would love to hear more.
Okay, so I have a few highlights here that I want to go over with you guys, but talking about how to navigate through each type of in-network versus out-of-network provider. So let's start with an in-network provider. So to use an in-network provider, it requires the provider enters into a contractual agreement with the payer. The network consists of a list of contracted providers for the patient to choose from, and set rates are negotiated between the insurance company and the provider. Okay, this generally means less of a cost to the family, which includes lower annual deductibles, coinsurances, and out-of-pocket maximums, those types of things that Matt was calling out earlier on. And then payment to the contract provider is generally quicker which positions the provider to bill the family for their outstanding portions quicker, right? So we don't want families lingering and waiting and wondering what their copays and their coinsurances are going to be. But we have this information quicker as an in-network provider, okay? So next slide, please. Along with in-network provider benefits, we can also use out-of-network benefits. And this doesn't mean that the insurer is limited to using that in-network provider, and there are options as an out-of-network provider. One caveat is the insurance plan must have out-of-network benefits. So when Matt was calling out, they'll do a VOB and they will look for what your deductible is, they'll look for what your out-of-pocket maximum is, and they will look for what your copays and coinsurances are. Typically, not always, there's never a 100% rule on everything that we're saying today, but typically your out-of-network benefits, you're going to have a higher deductible and you're going to have a higher out-of-pocket maximum, and they will probably have a higher coinsurance amount. That's what you generally see. And frequently you'll see that it's twice as much as your in-network, okay? The non-contracted providers are those not included on the provider list, and they generally pay off the insurance established usual and customary rates. And out-of-network benefits result in higher costs to the families, including higher annual deductibles, coinsurance amounts, and out-of-pockets, like I just said. And then your payment to an out-of-network provider generally comes in slower, which means it will take longer for the families to understand their financial responsibilities. But it is a doable process, okay? And we understand that many behavioral health, mental health care providers are not contracted right now because that is a new arena for the entire industry. Okay, next slide, please. So, I said one of the caveats is that you need to have out-of-network benefits, okay? So the third option for us here is that we can pursue a single case agreement. Providers may offer this service, and in fact, Embark does work with payers to pursue single case agreements when the insurance will allow for it. In this case, the service is still considered out-of-network, and it's treated as if it's contracted or in-network. So it's a special one-off agreement between the provider and the insurance company as it relates to that particular client. Rates are negotiated per client between the insurance company and the provider service, and ideally this results in less cost to the family. Lower annual deductible, the in-network deductible, and coinsurance and out-of-pocket maximums. And payment to the contracted provider is generally quicker, again, which positions the provider to share and bill the family for their out-of-pocket expenses as well in a quicker fashion.
So now as we're transitioning kind of into how to sort of wrap all of this up, how families can close the loop, what do families need to know? Really, like, what's the benefit of documentation? I know that these are questions oftentimes that in my role, I hear from families all the time as they're navigating mental health resources. So Shelley and Lori are going to take this question on and have a really great slide here to show everyone.
Yeah, so closing the loop, it's really important to be your own advocate. So here at Embark, we advocate for families. You can probably tell I have a lot of passion for the subject. I take it personally when we get denials, so I really fight, and all of us do, and we really fight for families to get the coverage that we believe they should have. But the behavioral health system is 20 years behind where it really should be with insurance. And so quality documentation is really important, and that's something that providers can do. Make sure you're documenting what's happening, make sure that you know the rules so that you're meeting those and it doesn't lead to unnecessary denials. Seek assistance from other medical professionals. That can be for providers and families. If you're seeking a single case agreement and your insurance doesn't have out-of-network benefits, then get a referral from an in-network provider, someone that's been seeing your child or the client. And then, a lot of plans are self-funded, which means that the premiums that are paid actually go into a fund that then are used to pay the claims. And while they're administered, or the clerical work, so to speak, is done by the insurance company, the employer has the say on what is and isn't paid. And so just making sure that you understand if your policy is self-funded or not, so that you can go to HR to get help if something's being denied, staying close with your provider, understanding what's happening with the case and what they may need, and then be the voice. You know exactly what's going on with your client, with your child, so you have to advocate and be part of that process.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I really appreciate that. Lori, before I transition over to Paul, is there anything that you might want to add?
The only thing I would add, not a lot, but I would say, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call your insurance company yourself. You know, if things are bottlenecking with the insurance company, and they do frequently, I have done this on a personal level for my own family's care in other arenas. And, you know, I've asked for single case agreements or in-network exceptions or things of that nature when the care wasn't provided here locally, or I needed to do something expanded outside of the protocol. So I would not be afraid to say, what are my options? You know, give me somebody that can help talk me through. Don't just accept a customer service rep who's going to give you the minimal information. Dig in, assert yourself, be kind with them, because they are just the voice and they're hearing a lot of noise as well. But I would assert yourself when there are bottlenecks with the payer in getting that authorization.
Lori, that's really great information. And I know that you said, you know, to really dig deep, advocate for yourself, feel empowered to kind of push through. Are there specific maybe titles that our guests who are interested in advocating on their own behalf should inquire about? Like, are there specific roles where it would be more helpful if they said, can I talk to somebody in XYZ department?
Yeah, so on a personal level, I've spoken with nurses at the insurance company, case managers. You can just go to the customer service and ask, and if you're not getting past that, go to ask for a supervisor. Shelley, what other things would you direct them to?
Yeah, you know, it really just depends on what the situation is. But I mean, we've had families write letters to the CEO of their insurance company because they weren't getting a response. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example, but I would start with member services, you know, just asking, you know, hey, and being aware that member services cannot see the provider side of things. So we may get misinformation, but I think if then you go back and work with your provider, you can work together to bridge the gap. So I would just say start with member services and then work with your provider, because they may know what the logical next step is.
Yeah, and when it comes to documentation, I know a lot of the families that I have personally worked with who are navigating insurance benefits, they will say, well, my insurance company provided me with a bunch of in-network options and all of the options are full or they're not accepting right now. And so I'm curious on the documentation piece, what should families be doing along the way as they are inquiring and trying to do their best to support their children in the healing journey? Are there tips that you can provide in that realm?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime that you have a conversation, whether it's with the insurance or provider, if you're looking for a single case agreement and or looking at in-network options and they're all full, I would just document the call, the date and time of the call, who you spoke with, if there's a reference number. There won't always be those things, but definitely document those, because then we can use them or your provider can use them to call back to insurance. We get told no a lot on single case agreements and that they're in-network options, but if we rule them out, then a lot of times we can get them to go ahead and do it. So I would say, again, just documenting the call, the date, the time, the name of who you spoke with, and a reference number if it's available or applicable.
I think another thing that's good is when they give you a list of in-network providers, check and see about the availability of the services and if there's a long wait list, and if they service the age of the client. You know, some providers, or if the gender of the client, you know, there are some very specifics, and the member services don't always see those exclusions. So you can maybe rule out a few of those quickly. And then if the wait list is, you know, extraordinarily long, those are things that will help advocate using an out-of-network provider for yourself.
This has been so great. And I know we're about 6 minutes to when we're hoping to open up for questions. And we still have Paul, who hasn't spoken yet today. And we are so excited to hear about what he has to say. So if we kind of pivot, and we've talked a lot kind of more in the micro sort of realm of everything, so very personal, one human to human, but I'm really curious, Paul, on kind of a macro level, kind of big picture, how does provider relations really play into all of this? And again, I know there's been a lot of questions about is Embark in network with any insurance companies, and what kind of advocacy positions can clinicians or parents really participate as it pertains to their insurers? So I know I asked quite a number of questions there, but feel free to take any of them that resonate with you.
Yeah, no, I'll try and address a couple of those. And Lori addressed this a little bit earlier about being in network versus out of network, and that's a lot of what payer relations tries to resolve. This is kind of a very basic. On the left, we have a very basic figure of what the medical provider community and on the right we have the health insurance company, and somewhere stuck in between those two things are these folks like myself. In payer relations, we have people like me. On the insurance side, though, they have counterparts to me, and what we try and do is pre-negotiate terms and conditions and reimbursement that guarantee a level of quality in the providers that health insurance companies are going to make available to their membership. So that's what we try and do. That's what we try and accomplish every day, is to connect the service providers with the insurance companies to ease the access of care for our patients who are also this health insurance companies members. So that's kind of the really high level role of payer relations. Click to the next slide. So this whole thing this conversation is really centered around, or I think around advocacy. What can we do? And I think there are two groups that are on this call. We have providers. I think about half the people on this call are healthcare providers, and then there are a lot of parents and members. The health insurance company would call you members. And don't ever underestimate the power of the consumer. Your employer has designed a set of benefits that are supposed to meet your needs as the consumer. So if your insurance company has a network that's not adequate, you as a consumer have the ability to nominate a provider. And I just did a quick Google search and said provider nomination Cigna, and this provider nomination form comes up. And you could do that for whatever insurance company you have. You can probably access these through, if you have a portal with your insurance company. Please don't underestimate the power that you have to shape the provider network of your insurance company. It's one of the most powerful things that you can do as a consumer. And also, your employer, is your human resources department at your employer, if you have one, that they are very influential with and carry a lot of weight with the insurance company, because at the end of the day, somebody referenced it about being self-insured versus fully insured, and that's a whole nother webinar. We won't discuss that, but if your employer, if you're self-insured, your employer has a lot more influence over the composition of the provider network. And so my point is, don't underestimate your ability to influence the insurance company. You are a very, very powerful person in that equation. And also, providers, when you're an in-network provider, one of the obligations that you have as being an in-network provider is to also refer to in-network providers. whenever possible. So if you're a provider, a contracted network provider, and one of your downstream referral partners is not a part of that same network, advocate with and for that downstream partner with your provider relations representative to include that downstream partner in the provider network. That is another way to increase access to care for your patients and what will hopefully become our patients as you make referrals to in-network providers.
Thank you so much, Paul. I just feel empowered to advocate now. And these are all extremely great tips
Yeah, please don't feel like my doctor's not in network, I can't do anything. You know, there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of influence. You probably have more influence than you do by being essentially the customer of the insurance company. So don't underestimate your influence to make changes within the insurance company.
Our amazing team members, Paul, Shelley, Lori, Sakina, Matt, and all the rest of the team at Embark who are working behind the scenes trying to navigate insurance benefits for families, as well as all of you in the audience who are doing that within your practices and who are doing that on behalf of your families. Again, I can't thank you enough. And together, advocating, taking some of these tips and today maybe picking one of them that we are going to do for our families or for our practice will make the world a better place and will hopefully make these statistics lower in the future. So I'm going to open the chat up for questions. I saw many questions already come through, but I'm going to leave maybe just 30 seconds. I have seen a lot about violations of parity laws or parity laws in general. I don't know if anybody wants to take that question on. It seemed like a number of people were curious.
I can speak briefly to parity. That's probably also a whole other webinar. We could probably spend all day talking about parity. So I saw someone also say that federal parity law is in place, and basically the gist of it is that they cannot treat mental health differently than they do medical care, right? So if they limit the number of days for mental health care inpatient, they also have to limit it for SNFs or skilled nursing facilities. So that's the gist. The problem with parity is they wrote the law, but they didn't write any enforcement into the law. So basically, we're seeing class action lawsuits and things like that being brought against providers to kind of establish what the rule should allow for enforcement. So the Department of Labor was engaged in that. There's lots of lobbying that occurs, and each state or some states have parity laws as well that add to that. So it's going to be really dependent on where you're at, what level of care, and what your plan specifically allows and doesn't allow.
That's really helpful. We do have a question from Jesus. When requesting authorization and an insurance said no to auth needed, do we get something in writing or we just go by their word? How do families and providers work with that?
Yeah, so when an insurance denies authorization, we should receive a denial letter from the insurance company that would give us appeal rights. The provider sometimes will get a copy of that, but if we're out of network, the member is more likely to receive it before we do. So I would just say work with the provider. If you are a provider, work with the member to get a copy of that denial letter. If it's something that the member and or the provider want to appeal, then that'll tell you how to go about the appeal process.
Okay, great. Thank you. I do really love this question from Michelle, and I feel like I probably know the answer to this, but I love that you asked it. So are there any magic words or phrases to get the insurance company to pay?
Can I jump in there? Yeah. I would encourage that any magic words are going to be revealed in your plan documents. So, I mean, like most of us, I don't really know what's in my insurance policy until I need it. And then when I need it, then I become an expert on my insurance policy. So go through and read the terms and conditions, the exclusions and the inclusions of your insurance policy, because your policy is just a contract between you and your insurance company. It's going to tell you the things that they're going to cover, the things that they're not going to cover, and the reasons why they're going to do either. So the magic words, there are no magic words, but the rules, the terms and conditions are going to be revealed in that plan document. And it's very revealing. It's not fun reading. If you really want to go to sleep real quick, just start reading an insurance policy, because it'll help you fall asleep pretty quickly. But that's where any, I think, magic words or phrases will be contained.
And that's
Thank
in
you,
your
Paul.
certificate of coverage, but I think also the magic comes with the documentation from the clinician as well. So it's a combination of understanding your insurance coverage and clearly documenting the medical need. What we work toward is to ensure that our therapists aren't just documenting the happy stuff and all the progress, but also need to document why the condition is continue to need to be treated. So there's a balance with showing success and also why there's continued need. And I think that's the magic that happens with the therapists, and teaching them how to document for the insurance lens, right? Because if you just say, oh, they're doing great and they're doing this and they're doing this, but why are they still in treatment then if there's no problem? So tell the problem, tell the story of the problem, tell the story of how you're going to treat the problem, and tell the story about the progress.
Wonderful. I was going up in some of the previous questions, and we have a few about single case agreements, and maybe some more nuances about them, like what about a single case agreement if we only have in-network benefits?
Yeah, if you're using an in-network provider, you don't need to obtain a single case agreement. Your contract, unless there's something outside of, their contractual relationship, but generally you should not need it. It would have to be a case-by-case basis depending on the contractual relationship between the provider and the insurance and the client needs.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question from Dawn. If I am covered out of network, can a high medical need help get that switched to an in-network through the insurance appeals process?
That's a good question. And again, I hate to keep going back to what your plan allows. However, that is the answer. So does the plan allow single case agreements? Are there other providers the insurance believes can treat the condition, we'll call it, the issues, the symptoms? If they believe so, then they're not going to approve it. But through the appeals process, a lot can be done. So there are 2 member appeals that are internal to the insurance company. There's an external appeal that goes to an outside organization. There's litigation. There are all kinds of things that can be done. There are complaints that can be filed with the state. So it really just depends on the individual that's needing treatment, what their symptoms are, and if they can be treated in network or not.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any additional questions? And feel free, we'll probably be able to take 1 or 2 more. You can also just unmute yourselves and we can have more of an open dialogue. Again, this is totally kind of an informal part of our presentation. It looks like actually Vicki was the one that had the question about the SCA recently, just that Lori answered. And she's saying that she had one RTC who did an SCA and another who said they don't do them. So any elaboration on that and why families would be hearing one thing versus the other?
It's the choice of the provider on how they want to engage and work with the insurance company. So one was willing to do the work and negotiate on behalf of the client, and another, sounds like another was not. It's a choice of the provider, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And also to add,
go ahead, Vicki. Yeah.
I was just going to add to that, that also there are often times where you might get incorrect information from an insurance rep when you're calling to verify benefits on either the provider side or on your side as the patient. And so that's also a possibility and another great reason to advocate for yourself and make sure that you're familiar with your benefits and what options you have on your plan.
Sabrina, there were a couple of questions up top around out-of-pocket expenses and deductibles. Can we address those?
Let's take those, and that can be our last question so that we can make sure we get out on time. Thanks for catching that, Lori.
Yeah. So basically, the question was, does the deductible go into the out-of-pocket? And again, we're going to say the same thing. It's based on your plan, and you need to understand that. So the first thing I would do is go look at your plan and or call and ask someone, does my deductible apply to my out-of-pocket? Many times it does, but also many times it does not. And then there was another one asking about, do co-payments always accumulate into the out-of-pocket max? Again, if it's a co-payment, it may or may not, depending on your plan. Co-insurances generally do. But again, I would go back to your plan and ask that. You should have just a grid, a quick summary grid that's available that will show you where those things lie and what they roll up into and don't roll up into. Sometimes your deductibles cross between in and out of network benefits as well, and sometimes they do not. Sometimes your in-network deductible or out-of-pocket max exists and there is not an out-of-pocket max for out-of-network. So it's really critical for everyone to understand what their plans are, get very intimate with your plans, and understand those key terms that Matt called out at the onset of the conversation.
Got you. This has been super helpful. Okay, I think we have time for one more. I know I've said this like 3 times ago, but we keep getting great questions, and you're also thorough, like very quick to respond with great information. So what if an RTC is on a do not authorize list? Like, how do you choose from that, I guess, is the question.
Oh boy, United is who I guess we're talking about here. So.
I saw you and Lori just start smiling, and I'm like, this must have hit the button. Goodness. So we saved the best question for last. Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, so United Healthcare is currently engaged in some questionable business practices where they are trying to credential out-of-network providers. There is, just for your information, there is a class action lawsuit going in against United by providers. Embark is not party to that at this time, and I don't know that we will be, but just so you know. So it depends on if they're on the do not auth list because of a safety issue, or if it's because they're providing a service like yoga or something experiential that United doesn't like to cover. And so what I would say is if your child is in care, or if your client is in care and they go on that do not auth list and it's not for a safety concern, there is the ability to continue to get authorizations until that client steps down, if United will allow it. So you'll have to work with practice management and or your CM or case manager on that. But if they're all on a do not auth list and they're in network, but there's an out of network provider that's not on the do not auth list, then I think, you know, you can advocate for a single case agreement in those situations.
And I would actually recommend, Pam, that you reach out to your insurance company and say, what do you want me to do now? You're basically telling me I can't use my benefits now. Like, it's going to take some consumer involvement too, like Paul was calling out, to help move that gauge.
Yes. So our goal today is to hopefully feel more empowered. I hope that you're just maybe able to bring the Shelleys and the Loris and the Matthews and the Sakinas and the Pauls, just like a little bit of their essence into your future conversations that you might have with your insurance companies as you're navigating your own mental health benefits. So I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your beautiful Thursdays and the rest of your week. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our panelists.